I never expected that the thing that would make me most proud of my son would start with a container of food missing from my refrigerator late at night. That night, I couldn't sleep. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and some work papers when I heard quiet footsteps in the hallway. It was almost 11 o'clock at night. My son Ethan was supposed to have been asleep for hours. I went to check and found him standing in front of the open refrigerator in his pajamas, very carefully and very quietly packing food into a plastic container. Bread, cheese, apples, hard-boiled eggs. He was so focused, he didn't hear me come up behind him. I said his name quietly. He jumped and turned around, and what I saw on his face wasn't fear, it was something else. An embarrassment, and underneath that something deeper that I couldn't name right away. He pressed the container against his chest and looked at me without saying anything. I asked him what he was doing. He was quiet for a few seconds, and then he said softly, "It's for Emma." I didn't know any Emma. I asked who that was. He said, "My classmate." We sat down at the kitchen table. I didn't rush him, and I didn't push, I just waited. And he started to talk. Slowly at first, carefully, like he was weighing each word, and then faster, like he needed to say this to someone for a long time and hadn't realized until now how much. Emma sits next to him in class. They've been friends for almost 2 years, not loud or showy, but real, the kind of quiet friendship that forms without any effort and holds without any explanation. A few months ago, she told him that her mother had died. She had been sick for a long time, and her father had sold everything he had, their apartment, all their savings, everything down to the last thing, to pay for her treatment. But her mother died anyway, and now Emma and her father were living in their old car, parked near the school. Her father was working, but he wasn't earning much, and after his wife's death, he had changed. He was drinking. Not every day, not all the time, but enough that sometimes Emma went to bed hungry. Ethan hadn't figured this out all at once. Emma never complained and never asked for anything. But one day he noticed she wasn't eating at lunch. He asked. She said she wasn't hungry. The next day, the same thing. He started paying attention, and slowly he understood. So he began bringing food from home. A little at first, then more. He packed containers and passed them to her quietly at school, and she took them and said nothing, and they both pretended it was a completely normal thing, like it was just part of an ordinary school day. Like one 11-year-old feeding another was simply how things worked. He told me all of this, and I listened without interrupting. And somewhere in the middle of it, I felt something tighten in my chest, not from sadness exactly, but from something bigger and harder to name. My 11-year-old son had been carrying someone else's tragedy inside him for months. Alone. Quietly. And he had never come to me, not because he didn't trust me, but because he wanted to protect. The girl from shame and us from extra trouble. I asked him if he knew where the car was parked right now. He said he did. I looked at the clock. I looked at my son, then at the container on the table, and I said, "Get dressed." He looked at me and didn't say a word. He just got up and went to get dressed. We drove in silence. Ethan sat next to me and gave me directions, and I looked at the nighttime streets of Austin and thought about how this child sitting beside me understood something about human suffering that I had never once consciously taught him. Something that can't be explained with words. It can only be shown through how you live, and then you hope that the child beside you sees it and finds their own way to understand it. The car was parked on a quiet street near the school. An old dark blue car under a tree, no lights inside. I pulled up beside it and sat there for a moment. Then I got out and knocked on the window gently. Nothing for a long time. Then the window came down, and I saw a man around 40, unshaven, with the eyes of someone who hadn't slept properly in a very long time. He looked at me warily and said nothing. I told him I was Ethan's mother, his daughter's classmate. I told him I knew where they were living and that I hadn't come to judge anyone or lecture anyone. I just asked if they would like to come with us. He was quiet for a long time. Then something small moved on the back seat, and I saw Emma. She was looking at me with large dark eyes and not saying anything. Ethan got out of the car and stood beside me, and she saw him, and something in her face changed. James, that was her father's name, finally nodded. That night at our kitchen table, we talked for a long time. Mark shook James's hand quietly and went to bed, because he understood that his presence wasn't what was needed right now. Emma fell asleep in Ethan's room in 20 minutes. Ethan went to the couch in the living room without a single complaint. And James sat and held his cup of tea in both hands and stared into it like there was something very important inside. I didn't rush. I just sat beside him and waited. And he started to talk. He said, "Do you know what the hardest part is? Not when someone dies. It's when you're standing right beside them and there's nothing you can do." I sold everything. Absolutely everything we had. The apartment, the car, every last saving. I thought, if I give up everything I have, if I leave nothing for myself, then maybe fate will understand that I'm serious. That I'm willing to do anything. I slept in the hospital corridor on a chair for months. I ate once a day to save every cent. I signed papers to sell the apartment without even reading them. It didn't matter what I was signing. The only thing that mattered was her. He paused. He looked somewhere past me. And then she died anyway. And I don't know what happened to me after that. I remember standing outside the hospital and not knowing where to go. I had nowhere to go. I had sold everything. And I couldn't cry. I just stood there looking at the street and feeling nothing. Only Emma was holding my hand and looking up at me, and I thought that I had to keep going for her. But I didn't know how. I still don't know how. Every morning I wake up, and for the first few seconds, I think she's just asleep beside me. And then I remember. And every time it's like the first time. He went quiet. I didn't say anything. After a long silence, he said quietly, "I don't know how to be her father without her." She knew how. I don't. I told him he already was her father. That his daughter came to school every single day and held herself together. And that couldn't have happened if her father wasn't there beside her. He was quiet for a long time after that. The days that followed found their own rhythm. Emma and Ethan walked to school together every morning, and there was a simple rightness to it that was hard to put into words. James got up early and tried to help with whatever he could, cleaning, fixing small things around the house, coming into the kitchen and quietly chopping vegetables while I cooked. We talked sometimes in the evenings when the kids had gone to bed. Not about important things and not about pain. About ordinary things, what his wife had been like when they were young, how they had met in their first year of college, and he spent 3 weeks working up the courage to ask her for coffee. How Emma at 3 years old refused to eat anything except pasta with butter, and they spent weeks trying to find ways to get anything else into her. And in those ordinary conversations, something in him slowly began to change. Not dramatically, not all at once, but it changed. 2 weeks later, he went back to work. He didn't say anything beforehand. He just got up earlier than everyone else one morning, shaved, put on a clean shirt, and left. He came back that evening tired, but somehow different. He sat at the table with everyone for dinner, and for the first time since he had arrived, he asked Ethan on his own how things were going at school. About 6 weeks after that, he came home and said he had found an apartment. Nearby, just a few stops away. He said it calmly and with a quiet dignity, and there was nothing left in him of the man who had sat at our kitchen table that first night staring into a cup of tea with shaking hands. He packed their single bag, the same one they had arrived with, and they got ready to leave. At the door, he stopped and turned around and looked at me. And he said, "Thank you, Sarah." Just that. Nothing more. I said, "Take care of each other." Emma hugged Ethan goodbye, and they both pretended it wasn't a significant moment, the way kids do when a feeling is too big and they don't know what to do with it. 8 months had passed since that November night. On the weekend, we drove out to our place outside the city. Mark, Ethan, and I, and James and Emma. A simple summer day, warm and quiet, the smell of cut grass and smoke from the grill. Mark and James stood together turning the meat and talking about something, work, cars, ordinary things I couldn't hear from where I was sitting, but I could see that they were easy with each other. James laughed at something Mark said, a real laugh, uncomplicated and unforced. Ethan and Emma had disappeared into the trees an hour ago, and every now and then their voices drifted back through the leaves. I sat on the porch with my coffee and looked at all of it. At Mark and James by the grill. At the smoke rising up through the branches. At how ordinary and warm this afternoon looked, and how no one passing by would ever have guessed that 8 months ago these two people were sleeping in an old car on a quiet street. I thought about my son, about the fact that he hadn't asked me that night whether he was doing the right thing. He hadn't waited for permission or looked for approval. He had simply seen someone who needed help and done what he could. At 11 years old, on his own, without a single prompt from anyone. I didn't teach him that. I never sat him down and explained compassion or kindness. I just lived beside him, and he saw something in that life, something important, and understood it in his own way. James looked up from the grill and caught my eye across the yard, and he just nodded. I raised my cup toward him,